The harsh wind whistled through the valley as Wylie Morrison stood at the edge of her porch, lantern held high against the consuming darkness of the Colorado night. It was April 1882, and the spring storms that rolled through Cannon City could be merciless, especially to the vulnerable. Her eyes strained against the blackness beyond the circle of light, searching for any sign of Dawson Xavier riding back from the eastern pasture. The midnight hour had come and gone, and still she waited. The lantern swayed slightly in her hand, casting dancing shadows across the weathered boards of the ranch house her father had built with his own hands. Just hours earlier, Dawson had noticed one of their calves, a newborn they'd named Penny, for her copper-colored coat was missing from the herd. Without hesitation, he'd saddled up and headed out, despite the threatening clouds and her protests about the late hour. "I'll be back before you know it," he'd promised, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he adjusted his hat. "Just keep a light burning." That had been 3 hours ago. Now, with the temperature dropping and the wind picking up, Wylie's worry had blossomed into fear. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped down from the porch, raising the lantern higher. The flame flickered wildly against the glass, but she shielded it with her body, determined to keep it burning bright. Dawson would be looking for that light to guide him home. The D-Bar-X ranch had been Dawson's dream since he'd first come to Cannon City 5 years ago, a young man of 22 with nothing but determination and skill with horses. Wylie had been 19 then, the only daughter of Thomas Morrison, Cannon City's doctor. Their paths had crossed when Dawson brought in a wounded ranch hand, and something sparked between them that day, something neither had been able to ignore. Now, as the foreman of her father's ranch purchased after her father's passing 2 years prior, Dawson took his responsibilities seriously. Too seriously sometimes, like tonight, riding out alone in dangerous weather for a single calf. A distant sound caught her attention, hoofbeats, faint but growing louder. Wylie's heart leaped as she moved forward, lifting the lantern higher still. "Dawson," she called, her voice nearly lost in the wind. The silhouette of a horse and rider emerged from the darkness, moving slowly. As they drew closer, Wylie could see Dawson slumped slightly in the saddle, his large frame cradling something against his chest. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by concern as she noticed the awkward way he sat in the saddle. "Thank God," she breathed as Copper, his chestnut gelding, plodded into the circle of lantern light. "I was beginning to think, sorry to worry you," Dawson cut in, his voice strained. "Found little Penny trapped in a ravine. Poor thing was half frozen." Wylie stepped closer, raising the lantern to see the small copper-colored calf nestled against Dawson's chest, wrapped in his jacket. The animal was shivering but alive, its big eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. "Bring her to the barn," Wylie said, already turning to lead the way. "I've got blankets and milk warming by the stove." As they moved toward the barn, Wylie noticed Dawson's grimace as he dismounted, the way he favored his right leg when he touched the ground. "What happened?" she asked, holding the barn door open as he limped through with the calf. "Nothing serious. Horse slipped on some loose shale and I took a tumble, just banged up my knee a bit." His voice was dismissive, but Wylie knew him well enough to hear the pain he was hiding. Inside the warm barn, Dawson gently placed the calf on a bed of fresh straw while Wylie hung the lantern on a hook and retrieved the blankets and milk she'd prepared. Together, they worked to dry and warm the trembling animal, Wylie carefully feeding it from a bottle while Dawson stroked its head. "You're lucky you found her," Wylie said softly, watching the calf's eager nursing. "Another hour out there." "Couldn't leave her," Dawson replied simply, running a hand through his dark hair, now damp with rain and sweat. "She's one of ours." Wylie looked up at him, taking in the exhaustion etched across his handsome face, the mud splattered across his clothes, and the way he still winced whenever he shifted his weight. Despite it all, his eyes were gentle as he watched the calf, satisfaction evident in his expression. "You should get inside," she told him, taking the empty bottle as the calf finished. "Let me look at that knee." "I'm fine, Wylie. Just need to don't argue with me, Dawson Xavier," she interrupted, fixing him with a stern look. "You've done your heroics for one night. Now it's my turn to take care of things." A smile tugged at his lips as he nodded, allowing her to help him to his feet. With his arm around her shoulders and hers around his waist, they made their way toward the house, pausing only for Dawson to cast one last look at the now sleeping calf. "She'll be fine," Wylie assured him. "You saved her." "We saved her," he corrected, his voice low. "That light of yours was the only thing that got us home." Wylie felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of supporting his weight. She'd been keeping that lantern burning for 3 years now, ever since Dawson had first come to work for her father, and somehow, he always found his way back to her. Inside the ranch house, the fire in the hearth cast a golden glow across the simple but comfortable furnishings. Wylie settled Dawson into a chair near the warmth and busied herself gathering medical supplies. As the daughter of a doctor, she'd learned more than most about tending wounds and setting bones. Her father had insisted, saying a woman alone in the West needed to know how to care for herself and others. "Take those muddy pants off," she instructed, setting down a basin of warm water and clean cloths. Dawson raised an eyebrow. "Miss Morrison, I'm shocked by such forward behavior." Despite her worry, Wylie felt a smile tug at her lips. "Don't flatter yourself, Mr. Xavier. I need to see that knee." With a chuckle that turned into a grimace, Dawson complied, removing his boots and carefully peeling off his mud-caked pants to reveal a swollen, angry-looking knee. Wylie sucked in a breath. "That's more than just banged up a bit. Looks worse than it feels," he insisted, though his jaw tightened as she gently probed the injury. "Nothing's broken," she concluded after a thorough examination, "but it's badly sprained. You'll need to stay off it for a few days." Dawson opened his mouth to protest, but Wylie silenced him with a look. "The hands can manage the herd without you killing yourself, Dawson. Don't make me tie you to the bed." A mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. "Now, there's an interesting proposition." "Hush," she scolded, fighting a blush as she wrapped his knee in clean bandages. The casual flirtation between them had been growing more frequent, more charged with unspoken feelings. But neither had taken the step to change their relationship from employer and foreman to something more, though Wylie had caught Dawson looking at her sometimes with an intensity that made her breath catch. When she finished bandaging his knee, Wylie brought him a cup of hot coffee laced with a splash of whiskey. Dawson accepted it gratefully, his fingers brushing against hers in the exchange. "Thank you," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "Not just for this," he gestured to his bandaged knee, "but for waiting. For keeping that light burning." Wylie sank into the chair opposite him, cradling her own cup between her hands. "I'll always keep a light burning for you, Dawson." The words hung between them, heavier with meaning than she'd intended. Dawson's eyes met hers across the space, dark and searching. "Why?" he asked softly. The directness of the question caught her off guard. Wylie looked down into her cup, watching the steam rise in delicate curls. "Because I know you'll come back to it," she answered finally, raising her eyes to his. "Because some things are worth waiting for, even in the darkest nights." Dawson's expression softened, something vulnerable crossing his features. "Wylie." A sudden crash of thunder shook the house, making them both jump. The storm that had been threatening all evening had finally broken, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. "Thank God you made it back before this hit," Wylie said, moving to the window to peer out into the deluge. Lightning illuminated the yard in brief, stark flashes, revealing the full force of the storm. Dawson joined her, limping to her side despite her protests. "Penny wouldn't have survived this," he said quietly, watching the rain. "Neither would you," Wylie replied, turning to face him. They were standing closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the lingering scent of rain and horses and something uniquely Dawson. "I've weathered worse," he said, but his eyes never left her face. "You don't have to," she whispered, hardly aware she was speaking aloud. "Weather storms alone, I mean." Dawson's hand rose slowly, tentatively, to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "What are you saying, Wylie?" Her heart pounded in her chest as she gathered her courage. 3 years of unspoken feelings, of watching him ride out and waiting for him to return, of working side by side to build something together, it all came down to this moment. "I'm saying that A frantic pounding at the door interrupted her confession. Dawson's hand dropped away as they both turned toward the noise. Wylie moved to answer it, opening the door to find Diego, one of their ranch hands, soaked to the skin and breathing hard. "Miss Morrison, Mr. Xavier," he gasped. "The creek's rising, fast waters already reaching the lower pasture. The herd's in danger." Dawson was already reaching for his coat. "Gather the men, move the cattle to higher ground. I'll be right there." "You will not," Wylie said firmly, stepping between him and the door. "Not on that knee." "Wylie, this is no time to Diego," she cut in, keeping her eyes fixed on Dawson's stubborn face. "Tell the men to start moving the herd. Mr. Xavier will join you shortly with instructions, but he won't be riding tonight." The ranch hand looked uncertainly between them before nodding and disappearing back into the storm. As soon as the door closed, Dawson rounded on her. "This is my job, Wylie. Those cattle are our livelihood. And you're no use to them if you fall off your horse because you can't stay in the saddle," she shot back. "You can direct the men from here. We have enough experienced hands to handle it." They faced each other, neither willing to back down, the storm raging outside matching the clash of wills inside. Finally, Dawson's shoulders slumped slightly. "At least let me ride out to see the situation," he compromised. Wylie hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." Before he could protest, she was already pulling on her oilskin coat and hat. "We'll take the wagon. It'll be safer in this weather and easier on your knee." 15 minutes later, they were fighting their way through the storm in the sturdy farm wagon, lantern swinging wildly from its hook as the horses struggled against the wind and rain. Even through the downpour, Wylie could see the danger ahead. The normally placid creek that bordered their property had swollen to an angry, rushing torrent, already spilling over its banks and creeping toward the pasture where part of their herd grazed. Their ranch hands were already at work, moving cattle to higher ground, their silhouettes visible in brief flashes of lightning. Dawson stood in the wagon, bracing himself against the seat, and called out instructions, directing the men to the safest route away from the rising water. For nearly 2 hours, they worked against the elements. Wylie drove the wagon along the edge of the danger, providing light and carrying supplies, while Dawson coordinated the evacuation of the herd. The rain never ceased, turning the ground to treacherous mud that threatened to trap wagon wheels and cattle hooves alike. When the last of the cattle reached the safety of the North Ridge, Dawson finally sank back onto the wagon seat, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. His clothes were plastered to his skin, his dark hair dripping water into his eyes, but there was satisfaction in his expression as he surveyed their saved herd. "You did it," Wylie said, handing him a canteen of water. "We did it," he corrected, echoing his words from earlier. "Couldn't have managed without you, Wylie." The ride back to the ranch house was slow and silent, both too tired for conversation. The storm was finally beginning to abate, the wind dying down though the rain continued steadily. By the time they reached the house, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. Diego and two other hands helped Dawson from the wagon while Wylie went ahead to stoke the fire and put on coffee. When Dawson limped through the door, his face was gray with pain and fatigue. "Straight to bed for you," Wylie ordered, helping him toward his room off the kitchen. As foreman, Dawson had the small but private room that had once been her father's study. "I'll bring you something hot to drink and check that knee again." Too tired to argue, Dawson allowed her to help him to his bed. His knee had swollen considerably, the bandage now tight against the inflamed joint. Wylie carefully removed it, wincing in sympathy at the deep bruising that had developed. "This is going to need ice," she murmured, gently applying a fresh poultice of herbs. "Kind of ironic," Dawson said through gritted teeth, "considering I was out trying to save a calf from freezing just hours ago." Wylie smiled despite herself. "That's what you get for being a hero twice in one night." When she finished rebandaging his knee, she helped him change into dry clothes, both of them too exhausted and focused on the task to be embarrassed by the intimacy. Once he was settled under the quilts, she brought him a mug of hot coffee laced with honey. "Drink this, then sleep," she instructed. "The men can handle things for a few hours." Dawson caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Stay," he said simply. "Just for a while, you need rest too." Wylie hesitated, aware of the impropriety but too tired to care. With a nod, she pulled the room's single chair closer to the bed and sank into it, cradling her own coffee between her hands. They sat in comfortable silence as the gray dawn light filtered through the small window. Outside, the ranch was coming to life despite the early hour and the night's drama. Wylie could hear the distant sounds of the hands tending to morning chores, the soft lowing of cattle, the crowing of a rooster determined to announce the day regardless of the lingering rain. "We should check on Penny," Dawson murmured, his eyes already growing heavy with approaching sleep. "Already did while you were talking to the men," Wylie assured him. "She's doing fine, curled up warm and dry in the barn." A smile touched his lips. "Good." His eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. "Wylie, about what you were saying before Diego interrupted." Wylie felt her cheeks warm as she remembered her almost confession. "It can wait," she said softly. "You need to rest." Dawson's hand found hers again, his fingers intertwining with hers with surprising strength for a man on the edge of sleep. "Promise me you'll tell me later." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart skip. "I promise." Satisfied, Dawson finally surrendered to exhaustion, his breathing deepening as sleep claimed him. Wylie sat beside him a while longer, watching the strong lines of his face soften in repose, allowing herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to wake up beside him every morning. Eventually, her own fatigue became too much to ignore. Gently extracting her hand from his, she rose and quietly left the room, leaving the door ajar so she could hear if he called. In her own bedroom, she changed into dry clothes and fell across her bed, not even bothering to pull back the covers before sleep claimed her. When Wylie awoke, the light through her window had the golden quality of late afternoon. She sat up with a start, dismayed to have slept so long. A quick glance in her mirror showed tousled auburn hair and the imprint of the quilt on her cheek. She splashed water on her face from the basin, ran a brush through her hair, and changed into a fresh dress before heading to check on Dawson. His room was empty, the bed neatly made. Frowning, Wylie moved through the house, calling his name. When no answer came, she stepped out onto the porch, scanning the yard for any sign of him. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dawson was in the corral, attempting to saddle Copper despite his injured knee. Even from a distance, she could see the pain in every movement, the way he leaned heavily on the fence for support. "Dawson Xavier," she shouted, hiking up her skirts to march across the yard. "What do you think you're doing?" He turned at her voice, guilt flashing across his face before it settled into stubborn determination. "There's work to be done, Wylie. The storm damaged the south fence, and there's still cattle scattered in the upper meadow." "And that's why we have ranch hands," she countered, reaching his side. Up close, she could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the tightness around his eyes that spoke of pain. "You're in no condition to ride." "I'm fine." He turned back to the saddle, fumbling with the cinch, just a little stiff. Wylie placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Why are you being so stubborn about this? One more day of rest won't hurt." Dawson wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on the saddle. "Can't afford to rest." This ranch needs its foreman healthy," she interrupted. "Not permanently lamed because he was too proud to heal properly." His head snapped up at that, blue eyes flashing. "This isn't about pride, Wylie." "Then what is it about?" For a long moment he said nothing, his jaw working as if chewing over words he wasn't ready to say. Finally, he sighed, some of the fight going out of him. "Your father trusted me with this ranch," he said quietly. "With your future, I can't let him down." Understanding dawned. Thomas Morrison had been more than an employer to Dawson. He'd been a mentor, almost a father figure to the young cowboy, who'd arrived in Cannon City with nothing but skill and determination. "My father would be the first to tell you that running yourself into the ground doesn't help anyone," Wylie said gently. "He hired you because he trusted your judgment, Dawson. Show him that trust wasn't misplaced by making the smart decision now." Dawson's shoulders slumped slightly, his hand falling away from the saddle. I need to feel useful." Wylie's heart ached at the vulnerability in his admission. Dawson had built his life on being capable, reliable, the man others turned to when things got tough. Being sidelined, even temporarily, struck at the core of how he saw himself. "You are useful," she assured him, "even if you're directing from the porch instead of the saddle for a few days." She hesitated, then added, "Besides, I need you too much to risk losing you to foolish heroics." His eyes softened at that, something warming in their blue depths. "Do you now?" Wylie felt her cheeks flush but held his gaze. "Yes, so please come back to the house. You can watch the yard from the porch if you insist on supervising, but no riding. Not today." After a moment's consideration, Dawson nodded. "All right, but just for today." Relief washed through her as she helped him back toward the house, his arm around her shoulders, his weight heavy but welcome against her side. The afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, turning the puddles from last night's storm into mirrors reflecting the clearing sky. By evening, Dawson had settled into a chair on the porch, a blanket over his legs despite his protests that he wasn't some invalid. Wylie brought their supper out to join him, and they ate watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "The men got most of the south fence repaired," Dawson reported, setting aside his empty plate. "We only lost 3 head in the flood, could have been much worse." "Thanks to you," Wylie said, sipping her coffee. "Your quick thinking saved the herd. And your stubbornness saved me from myself today," he acknowledged with a rueful smile. "I suppose we make a good team." The casual remark hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Wylie gathered her courage, remembering her promise from the early hours of the morning. "Dawson," she began, setting down her cup. "About what I was trying to say last night before Diego interrupted." His expression grew serious, attentive. "I'm listening." Wylie took a deep breath. "These past 3 years, watching you work this ranch, seeing your dedication, your integrity, I've come to rely on you in ways I never expected." "I'm just doing my job," he said, though his eyes never left her face. "No, it's more than that." Wylie stood, too restless to remain seated, moving to the porch railing. "When my father died, I thought I'd have to sell the ranch. I didn't think I could manage it alone, even with hired help. But you made me believe it was possible. You stood by me, taught me things my father never had time to show me." She turned to face him, heart pounding. "Last night, when you rode out into that storm for a single calf, I realized something. I wasn't just worried about you as my foreman. I was terrified of losing you because I love you, Dawson." The words hung in the twilight air, impossible to take back. Dawson's face remained unreadable for a moment that stretched painfully, and Wylie felt her confidence faltering. "I understand if you don't feel the same way," she hurried on. "I know it complicates things with you working for me. But I couldn't keep pretending that." In one fluid motion, despite his injured knee, Dawson rose from his chair and crossed to her, his hands gently framing her face. "Wylie Morrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have loved you since the first moment I saw you tending that injured ranch hand in your father's surgery, so focused and determined and beautiful it nearly stopped my heart." Joy bloomed in Wylie's chest, bright and overwhelming. "Why didn't you say anything? Your father had just hired me. I was nobody, a drifter with some skill with horses. You were the doctor's daughter, educated, refined. I didn't have anything to offer you then." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheeks. "I promised myself I'd work until I had something worthy of you, the right to ask for your hand properly." Wylie covered his hands with her own. "I never wanted anything but you, Dawson, not your position or what you could provide, just you." The last light of day caught in his eyes as he leaned closer. "Then you have me, Wylie Morrison, for as long as you want me." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer wrapped together. When they pulled apart, Wylie saw her own wonder reflected in Dawson's eyes. "That was worth waiting for," he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. Wylie laughed, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. "It certainly was." As night fell over the D-Bar-X ranch, they remained on the porch, talking of the future they might build together, planning and dreaming as the stars appeared one by one above them. And when Wylie finally lit the lantern against the gathering darkness, its warm glow seemed to promise that no matter what storms might come, they would weather them together. The weeks that followed brought changes to the D-Bar-X ranch, subtle at first, then more pronounced as spring deepened toward summer. Dawson's knee healed slowly but steadily, allowing him to return to his duties, though Wylie insisted he delegate more of the physical labor to the hands. Together, they found a new rhythm, their partnership evolving as their relationship deepened. Word spread quickly through Cannon City about the romance between Miss Morrison and her foreman. Some disapproved the banker's wife, Mrs. Holloway, made pointed remarks about Wylie marrying beneath her station, but most were supportive, having witnessed Dawson's character and dedication over the years. On a warm June evening, with the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open windows of the ranch house, Dawson finally proposed properly, on one knee, despite Wylie's protests about his barely healed injury. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment," he confessed, presenting her with a delicate silver ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's. The only thing of hers I managed to keep after she died." Tears welled in Wylie's eyes as she accepted both the ring and his proposal, overwhelmed by the knowledge that he'd entrusted her with something so precious. The wedding was planned for September, after the busiest season on the ranch had passed. In July, during the hottest days of summer, Dawson took Wylie on a surprise journey to a secluded corner of their property she'd rarely visited. There, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods near a small, clear stream, he showed her the foundation he'd been secretly laying. "Our own place," he explained, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "Not that I don't love the main house, but I thought you might want something that's truly ours, not just your father's home." Wylie's heart swelled at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect," she assured him, already envisioning the home they would build together. "Though we don't have to rush. The main house has plenty of room for now." Dawson smiled, pulling her into his arms. "For now," he agreed, "but someday we might need more space." He hesitated, then added softly, "For a family, I mean, if that's what you want." The thought of children, little ones with Dawson's blue eyes or her auburn hair, filled Wylie with longing and joy. "That's definitely what I want," she whispered against his chest. "Someday." As summer waned, the ranch flourished under their combined care. The calves born that spring, including little Penny who'd started it all, grew strong and healthy. The harvest was abundant, promising a comfortable winter ahead. And the foundation of their new home grew steadily, a physical manifestation of the future they were building together. 2 weeks before their wedding, disaster nearly struck. Dawson and two hands were moving cattle from a distant pasture when a sudden rockslide cut them off from their return route. Forced to take a treacherous alternate path, one of the hands, young Billy Potter, lost his footing on a narrow ledge. Only Dawson's quick reflexes saved him, though the rescue left Dawson himself dangling precariously until the second hand could pull them both to safety. When word reached Wylie, she rode out immediately, heart in her throat. She found them at the camp they'd made after the rescue, all 3 men battered but alive. The relief that flooded her at seeing Dawson safe was followed quickly by fear at how easily she could have lost him. That night, after Billy and the other hand had fallen asleep, Wylie and Dawson sat by the campfire, the stars impossibly bright above them. "I thought you promised me no more heroics," she said softly, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Some promises are harder to keep than others," he replied, squeezing her fingers. "I couldn't let him fall, Wylie." "I know." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's one of the reasons I love you, but I'd appreciate it if you'd try not to risk your life quite so often. I'm rather attached to the idea of growing old with you." Dawson pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'll do my best," he promised. "I have quite a few plans for our future that require me to stay alive." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the September sun casting a golden glow over Cannon City. Wylie stood in her bedroom in the ranch house, dressed in an elegant cream-colored gown that had once been her mother's. Her auburn hair was swept up with sprigs of wildflowers, and in her hands she held a bouquet of late summer blooms gathered from the ranch's meadows. A knock at the door revealed Maria Lopez, their cook's wife, who had become a dear friend and confidante. "You look beautiful, Miss Wylie," she said, her eyes shining. "Like an angel, thank you, Maria." Wylie smiled, fighting back nervous tears. "Is everything ready?" "Everything is perfect. The pastor is here, the guests are seated in the garden, and Mr. Dawson," Maria broke into a wide smile. "Well, he has been pacing the barn for an hour, driving poor Diego to distraction." The thought of Dawson, usually so confident and composed, pacing nervously made Wylie laugh. "Tell him I'll be right down." The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Standing beneath an arbor twined with climbing roses, with their friends and neighbors gathered around them, Wylie and Dawson exchanged vows that they had written themselves. Dawson's voice, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he promised to love and cherish her for all his days. Wylie, who had feared she might cry, found herself smiling so widely her cheeks ached as she pledged her life and love to him. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the ranch yard, lanterns hanging from tree branches, and a local fiddler providing music for dancing. As twilight descended, Dawson led Wylie away from the festivities, toward the rise behind the house where they could look out over the entirety of the D-Bar-X. "Mrs. Xavier," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they gazed at their land. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Wylie replied, leaning back against his chest. "Absolutely perfect." They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "You know," Dawson said thoughtfully, "if you hadn't kept that lantern burning that night, Penny and I might never have found our way home." Wylie turned in his arms to face him. "I'll always keep a light burning for you," she promised, echoing her words from that fateful night. "No matter how dark it gets." Dawson lowered his head to kiss her, slow and sweet, a promise sealed beneath the vast Colorado sky. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The new house was completed before the first snows fell. A cozy two-story home with wide windows to catch the mountain light and a deep porch for summer evenings. Moving in just before Christmas, they celebrated the holiday in their new home with a small tree cut from their own land and simple gifts exchanged by firelight. Winter was harsh that year, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Yet Wylie found a special joy in those snow-bound days, learning the rhythms of married life, discovering new facets of the man she'd married. Dawson revealed a talent for storytelling during the long evenings, entertaining her with tales of his travels before settling in Cannon City. In turn, she shared her own dreams of perhaps reopening her father's medical practice someday, of continuing his legacy of healing. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The calving season was successful, increasing their herd significantly. And in late April, as the first wildflowers bloomed across the meadows, Wylie shared news of her own with Dawson they would be welcoming a child before the year's end. The joy that transformed his face at her announcement was something Wylie would remember all her days. Dawson lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned about her condition. "Are you sure you're all right? Should you be resting? Do we need to send for a doctor?" The questions tumbled out, making her laugh. "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "And we have months yet to prepare." As summer progressed, so did Wylie's pregnancy. Dawson grew increasingly protective, hiring additional hands to ensure she didn't overexert herself with ranch duties. Wylie accepted his concern with good grace, though she insisted on maintaining her normal activities as much as possible. "I'm carrying a child, Dawson, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching a glorious sunset paint the western sky. "I know," he said, his hand gently covering the swell of her belly. "I just can't bear the thought of anything happening to either of you." Wylie covered his hand with hers. "Nothing will happen. We're stronger than you think." As if in agreement, the baby chose that moment to kick, a firm little movement against Dawson's palm. His eyes widened in wonder. "Was that your son or daughter saying hello?" Wylie confirmed, smiling at his expression. From that moment on, Dawson spent every evening with his hand on her belly, talking softly to their unborn child about horses and cattle and the beauty of the land that would one day be theirs. Wylie would watch his face in these moments, heart full to bursting with love for this man, who had once ridden through a midnight storm to save a calf, and who now prepared with equal dedication to welcome their child. In November, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, William Thomas Xavier entered the world after a long, difficult labor. Named for both Wylie's father and Dawson's grandfather, he was a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and eyes that promised to be as blue as his father's. Holding his son for the first time, Dawson wept unashamedly. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching the tiny fingers that curled reflexively around his own. "You're both perfect." Wylie, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their newborn with such gentle reverence. "He looks like you." "Poor kid," Dawson joked, though his eyes never left his son's face. "Hopefully he has your brains and my luck." "Your heart," Wylie corrected softly. "I hope he has your heart." The first months of William's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joy-filled days. Dawson proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was managing ranch hands. He often took the baby with him for morning chores. William snuggled against his chest in a sling Wylie had fashioned, solemnly explaining the workings of the ranch to his infant son. By the time William's first birthday approached, he was already showing signs of his father's adventurous spirit, crawling with determination toward any open door or interesting object. Wylie found herself constantly one step behind him, marveling at his curiosity and energy. "He's going to be a handful," she remarked to Dawson one evening as they watched their son finally succumb to sleep after a day of exploration. "Like his mother," Dawson replied with a grin, pulling her into his arms. "Stubborn, determined, impossible to say no to." "I seem to recall you saying no to me quite effectively when I suggested you might consider running for town council," Wylie countered, leaning into his embrace. "That's different. Politics would bore me to tears." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides, I have everything I need right here." As William grew from baby to toddler, the D-Bar-X ranch prospered under their care. Dawson's reputation as one of the finest horsemen in the territory brought buyers from as far away as Denver for their stock. Wylie, drawing on her father's medical knowledge, began treating minor ailments and injuries for their hands and neighbors, gradually building a small practice that she managed alongside her duties as mother and rancher's wife. Their family expanded again when William was 3 with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Maria Xavier. Unlike her brother's dramatic entrance, Elizabeth arrived quickly and with minimum fuss, as if eager to join the world. She had Wylie's auburn hair and sweet disposition, but Dawson's blue eyes and stubborn chin. "Another heartbreaker," Diego commented when he first saw the newest Xavier, making Dawson groan. "Don't even jest about that," he warned the ranch hand. "I'm already planning to lock her in the root cellar when she turns 16. Wylie, overhearing, raised an eyebrow. "You'll do no such thing, Dawson Xavier. Our daughter will be free to make her own choices, just as I was." "And look how that turned out," he retorted with a wink. "You ended up with a penniless cowboy." "The best decision I ever made," she replied softly, and the love that passed between them made Diego duck his head and mumble about checking on the horses. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. William, serious and thoughtful despite his adventurous nature, showed an early aptitude for working with the animals, following Dawson around the ranch from dawn till dusk. Elizabeth, 2 years younger but twice as fearless, preferred helping Wylie with her medical work, fascinated by bandages and herbs and the healing arts. When William was 7 and Elizabeth 5, a terrible drought struck Colorado. For months, the skies remained stubbornly clear, the sun beating down relentlessly on parched earth. Streams and ponds dried up, grass withered, and ranchers throughout the territory faced difficult decisions about their herds. The D-Bar-X fared better than most, thanks to the natural spring that fed their creek and Dawson's foresight in storing feed. Still, the strain showed in the long days and worried conversations after the children were in bed. "Jenkins is selling off half his herd," Dawson reported one night, his face grave. "Says he can't afford to feed them through another month of this, let alone till winter." Wylie poured him a cup of coffee, her own concern mirrored in his expression. "What about us? How long can we hold out?" Dawson ran a hand through his hair, now showing touches of gray at the temples, though he was only 37. "If we're careful, we should make it. The spring's still running, thank God, but if this keeps up through fall..." The unspoken worry hung between them. A ranch without water was a ranch doomed to fail, and while they had savings, losing their livelihood and home would devastate not just them, but the families who depended on the D-Bar-X for their own survival. "We'll make it," Wylie said with more confidence than she felt, reaching across the table to take his hand. "We've weathered worse." Dawson's fingers tightened around hers. "Together we have." The drought stretched on through summer and into early fall. Dust coated everything, working its way into clothes, food, lungs. The children were forbidden to play far from the house, both for safety and to conserve their energy in the relentless heat. Then, on a scorching September day, disaster struck. William, now old enough to help with simple chores, was collecting eggs when he spotted smoke rising from the distant hay barn. He ran to raise the alarm, and within minutes, every able body on the ranch was fighting to contain the blaze that threatened their winter feed. Dawson organized the men into bucket lines from the creek, while Wylie kept the children safely away, her heart in her throat as she watched her husband disappear into the smoke-filled structure to save what he could. For hours, they battled the fire, finally containing it before it could spread to other buildings. The hay barn was a loss, but thanks to quick action, they'd saved nearly half their winter feed by moving it to safety before the flames took hold. As twilight fell, Wylie found Dawson sitting alone on the charred remnants of the barn's porch, his face blackened with soot, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You should let me clean those burns," she said softly, kneeling beside him to examine the angry red marks on his forearms. "In a minute." His voice was rough from smoke. "I'm just trying to figure out where we go from here." Wylie sat beside him, not caring about the soot that transferred to her dress. "We rebuild. We always do." Dawson shook his head. "It's not just the barn, Wylie, this drought. I'm not sure how much longer we can hold on. Maybe we should consider Jenkins' offer to buy the south pasture." "No." The force of her response surprised even her. "This land is our children's future, your legacy and mine. We're not selling a single acre." A smile tugged at Dawson's tired face. "There's that Morrison stubbornness." "Xavier stubbornness now," she corrected, taking his hand. "And don't you forget it." That night, as they lay in bed listening to the children's steady breathing from the adjoining room, Dawson turned to her in the darkness. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For believing in us, in this place. Even when I start to doubt." Wylie curled against him, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the lingering smoke. "That's my job. You keep the ranch running, I keep you going." His arms tightened around her. "Best arrangement I ever made." 3 days later, the miracle they'd been praying for finally arrived. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. By evening, the first raindrops fell, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence until the parched earth drank deeply of the blessed moisture. The entire family stood on the porch, watching the life-giving rain transform their world. William and Elizabeth danced in puddles, faces turned upward to catch the droplets, while Wylie and Dawson stood arm in arm, grateful beyond words. "Told you we'd make it," Wylie said, resting her head against his shoulder. "Never should have doubted," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her rain-dampened hair. With the drought broken and the autumn rains restoring life to the land, the D-Bar-X began to recover. The hay barn was rebuilt, sturdier than before, and by Christmas, there was cause for celebration beyond the holiday itself. Wylie was expecting their third child, due in the summer. The news was met with excitement from William and Elizabeth. Though William, now 8 and increasingly serious about his future role on the ranch, had practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether it would cry all night like the Johnsons' new baby. "Probably," Dawson told him candidly. "Babies do that. You certainly did." "I did not," William protested indignantly. "You most certainly did," Wylie confirmed, ruffling his dark hair. "For 3 straight months. Your father used to walk you around the house all night singing the most terrible cowboy songs until you fell asleep." William looked at his father with newfound respect. "Really, really," Dawson assured him, "and I'll do the same for this one if needed." "Poor baby," Elizabeth giggled. "Papa's singing might make it cry more." The winter passed peacefully, and with spring came new growth, new calves, and increasing evidence of the new life Wylie carried. By June, she was moving more slowly, finding the Colorado heat more challenging than with her previous pregnancies. "Perhaps we're getting too old for this," she joked to Dawson one evening as he rubbed her swollen feet. "Speak for yourself, woman," he retorted. "I'm in the prime of life." Wylie laughed, noting the silver threading his dark hair, the lines that framed his eyes and mouth evidence of years of sun and wind and laughter. At 38, he was still as handsome as the day she'd met him, perhaps more so for the character time had etched into his features. "You certainly are," she agreed softly, "though I wouldn't mind if this little one arrived sooner rather than later." As if in response, the baby kicked vigorously, making them both laugh. On a sweltering July night, with a full moon illuminating the ranch in silver light, their second son made his entrance into the world. After a relatively easy labor, James Dawson Xavier announced his arrival with a lusty cry that brought his sleepy siblings running to meet their new brother. "He's so tiny," Elizabeth marveled, peering at the red-faced infant in her mother's arms. "But he's loud," William observed, wrinkling his nose. "Louder than Elizabeth was." "That's because he's a boy," his sister informed him with all the authority of her 7 years. "Boys are always louder." Dawson, watching his family with undisguised joy, pulled both older children into a hug. "He'll grow," he promised, "and you two will be the best big brother and sister any baby could ask for." In the years that followed, the Xavier family and the D-Bar-X ranch continued to thrive. William, growing tall and serious like his father, took on increasing responsibility as he entered his teens. By 16, he was effectively Dawson's right hand, with a natural gift for working with horses that surpassed even his father's considerable skill. Elizabeth, fiery and independent, divided her time between helping Wylie with her expanding medical practice and exploring every corner of their property. At 14, she declared her intention to become a doctor, a proper one with a degree and everything, and began studying her grandfather's medical books with single-minded determination. Young James, different from his siblings in temperament if not appearance, showed an early aptitude for numbers and a practical mind that served the ranch well. By the age of 10, he was keeping better track of the cattle counts and feed stores than their longtime bookkeeper, Mr. Peterson. Through it all, Wylie and Dawson remained the heart of the D-Bar-X, their partnership deepening with each passing year. There were arguments, of course, Wylie's stubborn independence occasionally clashing with Dawson's protective instincts, especially as they both grew older. But these storms always passed, leaving their bond stronger for the testing. On the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the rise behind their home, the same spot where they had paused on their wedding night to look out over their land. The ranch had grown significantly over the years, with additional pasture bought from neighbors who decided to move on, new barns and corrals, even a small schoolhouse where Wylie taught the ranch children and those from neighboring properties. "Did you ever imagine this?" Wylie asked, leaning against Dawson's solid warmth. "When you first came to Cannon City, did you see all this in your future?" Dawson's arm tightened around her waist. "Not specifically. I knew I wanted land of my own someday, a place to put down roots." He turned to her, his blue eyes still capable of making her heart skip even after all these years. "But you I couldn't have imagined. You were the dream I didn't know to dream." Even now his words could make her blush like a girl. "Flatterer. Honest man," he corrected, kissing her softly. "Everything good in my life came from that night you waited with the lantern. If I'd ridden past this ranch, if you hadn't been standing there in the darkness, you'd have found another light," Wylie said. "Another ranch, another life." Dawson shook his head. "No, there was only ever you, Wylie. Only ever us." As twilight deepened around them, they made their way back to the house, where their children waited to celebrate the anniversary with a special dinner. William had ridden to town for a bottle of champagne. Elizabeth had baked a cake using her grandmother's recipe. And even James had contributed, crafting a wooden picture frame that held a sketch of the ranch house drawn by a traveling artist the previous summer. Surrounded by the family they had built together, Wylie caught Dawson's eye across the table and saw in his smile the same wonder and gratitude she felt. From that stormy midnight rescue of a lost calf, they had created something enduring and beautiful, a legacy of love that would outlast them both. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in the quiet of their room, Dawson pulled Wylie into his arms, swaying gently as if to music only they could hear. 20 years, he murmured against her hair, "and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the drought, the fire, James's colic." Wylie teased, her hands resting comfortably at the small of his back. "All of it," he confirmed. "The hard times made the good ones sweeter." Wylie tilted her face up to his. "Then here's to 20 more," she whispered, "and all the sweet and bitter days to come." As he lowered his mouth to hers, sealing their renewed promise with a kiss, Wylie knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had all others together, with a light always burning to guide them home. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the Xavier family and the D-Bar-X ranch. William, at 22, took a wife, Sarah Johnson, daughter of a neighboring rancher whom he'd known since childhood. Their wedding, held on the ranch under a perfect June sky, was a joyous occasion that brought the entire community together in celebration. Elizabeth pursued her dream of becoming a doctor with characteristic determination, traveling to Denver to study with a respected physician there. Her letters home were filled with excitement about the medical advances she was learning, though they also revealed occasional frustrations at being one of the few women in a field dominated by men. "But I'm a Xavier," she wrote proudly, "and Xaviers don't back down from a challenge." James, now 16, continued to show his aptitude for business and numbers, implementing new breeding programs and marketing strategies that increased the ranch's profitability beyond even Dawson's ambitious goals. When William teased him about being more businessman than cowboy, James simply replied, "Someone has to make sure this place is still standing when your children inherit it." For Wylie and Dawson, watching their children grow into capable, confident adults brought a profound satisfaction. Their partnership, both in marriage and in running the ranch, had only deepened with time. The silver in Dawson's hair was now matched by strands of gray in Wylie's auburn locks, and the lines around their eyes spoke of years of laughter and occasional tears. In their 30th year of marriage, life delivered an unexpected blessing and challenge. Sarah and William welcomed twins, a boy and girl they named Thomas and Grace. The joy of becoming grandparents was tempered only by concern for Sarah, who had experienced a difficult delivery and was slow to recover her strength. Without discussion, Wylie and Dawson stepped in to help, taking the twins into their home for the first few months while Sarah regained her health. Those days of caring for newborns again, the midnight feedings, the endless rocking, the tiny fingers curling trustingly around their own, brought a special sweetness they hadn't anticipated. "Remember when we thought we were too old for this at 38? Wylie asked one night as they sat before the fire, each holding a sleeping infant. Dawson chuckled softly. "And here we are at 58, doing it all over again." "Not quite the same," she pointed out. "We get to hand them back eventually." "True enough," he agreed, looking down at his granddaughter's peaceful face. "Though I'm in no hurry." By the time the twins were walking, Sarah had fully recovered, and the young family moved into the original ranch house, which had been expanded and modernized over the years. Wylie and Dawson remained in the home they had built together, now with an addition that served as Wylie's clinic and consultation room. Elizabeth returned from Denver a qualified doctor, setting up practice in Cannon City, but making regular visits to the ranch to assist her mother and care for the more remote families in the area. At 28, she was as independent as ever, deflecting questions about marriage with good-humored comments about being married to medicine. Until, that is, she met Daniel Cooper, a widowed rancher with a young daughter who needed care after a riding accident. The attraction between them was immediate and powerful, despite Elizabeth's initial resistance to the idea of becoming a stepmother. Within a year, they were married, and Elizabeth split her time between her practice in town and her new family. James, always the most practical of the Xavier children, courted and wed Mary Sullivan, daughter of Cannon City's banker, in a match that combined genuine affection with advantageous connections for the ranch. They built a home on the eastern edge of the property, where James established a breeding operation for the specialty horses that had become the D-Bar X's most profitable enterprise. As their family expanded and the ranch operations grew more complex, Dawson and Wylie gradually stepped back from day-to-day management, allowing their children and their spouses to take on greater responsibility. Not that either of them truly retired. Wylie's medical skills were still in high demand, and Dawson could often be found in the barns, working with a particularly challenging horse or offering quiet guidance to a young ranch hand. Their 40th anniversary arrived on a perfect September day, marked by a gathering of the entire extended family, 3 children with their spouses, 7 grandchildren ranging from teenagers to toddlers, and a community of friends and longtime employees who had become like family over the decades. William, now a respected rancher in his own right with graying temples that reminded Wylie startlingly of his father at the same age, raised a toast to his parents beneath the cottonwood trees, where they had celebrated their wedding so many years before. "To Wylie and Dawson Xavier," he said, his deep voice carrying across the assembled guests, "who taught us all what it means to build something that lasts. Not just this ranch, though that's impressive enough, but a family bound by love, respect, and the willingness to ride out at midnight if someone needs you." Laughter rippled through the crowd at this reference to the story. They'd all heard countless times how Dawson had ridden through a storm to rescue a lost calf, and how Wylie had waited with a lantern burning bright to guide him home. Dawson, his hair now more silver than dark but his blue eyes as vibrant as ever, squeezed Wylie's hand as he stood to respond. "40 years ago," he began, "I made the best decision of my life when I said I do to this extraordinary woman. But the truth is, I think I knew from that first night when I saw her standing on the porch with that lantern, that my heart had found its home." He turned to Wylie, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You've been my light in every darkness, my partner in every joy and struggle. I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you with every breath I have left." "Which will be plenty," Wylie added firmly, rising to stand beside him amidst the laughter and applause, "because I'm not done with him yet." The celebration continued as the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured for so many years. Dancing to the same fiddle music that had played at their wedding, Wylie rested her head against Dawson's shoulder, content in a way that transcended words. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she assured him. "You, more than I ever thought possible." He twirled her gently, mindful of the arthritis that sometimes troubled her on cold mornings. "Though I'm thinking we should consider taking that trip to San Francisco that James has been urging on us. Might be nice to see the ocean before we're too old to enjoy it." Wylie looked up at him in surprise. Dawson had always been reluctant to leave the ranch for more than a day or two, even as their children had taken over most responsibilities. "Really? You'd want to go, with you? Anywhere?" He grinned, the expression so reminiscent of the young cowboy who'd stolen her heart that Wylie felt a familiar flutter in her chest. "Besides, we've earned a little adventure, don't you think?" That winter, they did indeed make the journey to San Francisco, traveling by train in a comfort that would have seemed unimaginable in their early years together. The city fascinated them with its bustling energy and views of the vast Pacific, though both admitted to feeling a keen homesickness for the open spaces and familiar rhythms of the ranch. Returning home in early spring, they found the D-Bar-X flourishing under the combined care of their children. William had expanded the cattle operation. Elizabeth had established a small but well-equipped clinic in one of the outbuildings where she treated patients 2 days a week, and James had secured contracts with the Army for their renowned quarter horses. "Seems they manage just fine without us," Dawson observed as they settled back into their home. "Did you doubt they would?" Wylie asked, unpacking the gifts they'd brought back for the grandchildren. "Not really," he admitted. "We raised them well." Life settled into a new rhythm as they entered their 6th decade together. There were losses, of course, old friends who passed on, the gradual limitations imposed by aging bodies. Dawson's once injured knee troubled him more in cold weather, and Wylie found her eyesight wasn't what it had been, requiring spectacles for close work. But there were new joys as well. Great-grandchildren began to arrive, bringing the special delight of seeing their legacy extend to yet another generation. The ranch, now largely managed by William's oldest son Thomas with input from his father and uncles, continued to prosper, adapting to the changing times while maintaining the values and traditions established by Dawson and Wylie. On a crisp October evening in their 45th year of marriage, They sat together on the porch of their home, a quilt shared across their laps against the autumn chill. The sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, silhouetting the mountains that had been the backdrop to their life together. "You remember," Dawson asked suddenly, "that night you were waiting with the lantern when I brought Penny home?" "Of course," Wylie replied, her hand finding his beneath the quilt. "How could I forget? It was the night I finally admitted to myself that I loved you." "Was it?" He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "You never told me that part." Wylie smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday rather than nearly half a century ago. "When I saw you riding back with that calf, exhausted and hurt but so determined, something shifted inside me. I couldn't pretend anymore that what I felt was just friendship or respect." Dawson brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to knuckles now swollen slightly with age. "And here I thought it was my charm and good looks that won you over." "Those didn't hurt," she conceded with a laugh. "But it was your heart, Dawson. Always your heart." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, one by one. In the distance, a lantern flickered in the window of the main ranch house, where William and Sarah now lived. Another light shone from James and Mary's home to the east, and a third from the clinic where Elizabeth stayed when visiting from town. "We built something good, didn't we?" Dawson said softly, his gaze taking in the scattered lights that marked their family's presence on the land. "Very good," Wylie agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Worth every hardship, every worry, every midnight ride." As darkness settled fully around them, Dawson lit the lantern that still hung beside their door, a ritual they had maintained through all their years together. Its warm glow illuminated their faces, casting soft shadows across the porch. "For travelers finding their way home," he murmured, the words a familiar refrain between them. "For lost calves and weary cowboys," Wylie added, completing the phrase they'd spoken countless times. In the circle of light from that lantern, with the ranch quiet around them and the stars bright overhead, they sat together, two hearts that had found in each other the courage to build a life, a family, a legacy. The journey that had begun on a stormy night with a desperate rescue and a steadfast vigil had led them through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, all weathered together. And as they had done every night since that first midnight ride, they kept the lantern burning bright, a beacon of welcome, a symbol of hope, a testament to love that endures through all seasons.